Welcome to Southwest Florida Real Estate Update, hosted by area realtor Jim York and York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty. Our show will bring you the most up-to-date information about the local real estate market, featuring leading experts in the real estate field.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Southwest Florida Real Estate Update. I'm Michael York with the York Real Estate Group, and I'm joined today by our host Jim York and his guest Don Ross of Ross Title and Escrow.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Well, we're here today with Donald Ross of Ross Title.
Afternoon, Jim.
Don, just tell the people a little bit about yourself that haven't seen the show.
Okay, I'm a Naples attorney. I've been a member of the bar since 1981. I specialize in real estate closings. I also have a tax degree. I'm the attorney for Downing Fry Realty, have been for 25 years. Own part of the company, own Ross Title and Escrow, have my own law firm. Title company has 8 employees. The one who's been with me the longest has been 30 years. Janet, her daughter, 20 years. Her sister, 10 years. Her niece, 3 years. I got the whole family. So we have a nice group that know each other and work well together, and that allows me to come here and do shows like this.
You haven't forgot anything, have you?
I probably have.
Okay. Where are you located?
There you go. I am on the corner of 6th Avenue North and 41, west side of 41, right across from Pastrami Dan's.
Right. Well, I've used you obviously for years, and it's always been a pleasure to work with you. But today we're going to talk about a smooth transaction at a closing.
Yes.
And I think you have 7 points that we're trying to cover today. And let's start with the first one.
Well, the 7 things never to say or never to do at a real estate closing. And these are actual things that have happened in real estate closings over the years. But the first thing is the realtor who shows up and tries to do what I do. Tries to give legal advice. I have one in particular who will comment on the loan documents, will want to explain the loan documents, and it puts me in an awkward spot because the realtor referred the business to me in the first place, and in the second place they might be missing certain critical points which I have to go back later on. They'll give an estimate on what it costs to fix something. We had one with a bad pool pump, and the realtor said $5,000 should cover it. Well, there was more than the pool pump when you got into it. There was the pool drain, and it was way more than $5,000. The realtor ended up writing a check.
But this should have been taken care of before the day of closing, right?
It should have been, but the way the contract is written, the parties escrow 200% of the estimated cost to complete the work that's not done at closing.
Right.
And it's very, very difficult to get an estimate the day before closing on how much it's going to cost to finish it. And one of the worst situations are permits. That falls under the same category as general repair items. And all we're waiting for is the inspector to show up and give the final approval for the permit. And if everything was done correctly, it costs $0. But if it wasn't done correctly, you don't know what it costs. So it's not a good thing for the realtor or anyone other than the clients to determine what is the appropriate amount to hold in escrow. Otherwise, they'll come after me, they'll come after you, they'll come after anyone else who was at that closing and came up with that number.
In some cases, not to get off the subject here, but we do an inspection when we're doing a transaction, and then some people have a re-inspection done the day before closing to make sure those items are taken care of. So sometimes we've relied on, right or wrong, okay, maybe you can correct me, is the inspector might say, estimate would be to fix something like that. Kind of takes it away from
Takes it off you.
Right.
I mean, you have a construction background, so you're in a different category, but I know for a fact that your E&O coverage does not cover legal advice or, or drafting or things like this. So my job in part is to protect the agents too. And agents, because they're good agents and they care about their customers, want to do everything for the customer.
That's right, they do.
And they overstep their limits. They, out of good intent, they get into things because they want to be helpful, things that they're not trained for, that their license doesn't cover, that their insurance doesn't cover, and they have a hard time saying that that's not what I do, that's not what I know.
They certainly do.
I'll do that all the time. People
Right.
will ask me what I think about this or that, a construction issue, a repair issue, and I'll say, well, I'm a pretty decent lawyer. I got a lot of experience in this area, but I don't know what end of the hammer to hold.
That's
I mean,
right.
I try to make a joke out of it, but I mean, making a
Right.
point, you don't have to know everything.
Yeah.
You know how to sell, I know how to do real estate closings.
Yeah, and that's what I tell them. My real estate law doesn't allow me to tell you this,
No.
but I might know, but I have to refer to the attorney, the closing agent, the insurance person, or whoever it might
Sure.
question and answers to. So let's go to the next one here. What do you got next?
The dry closing, typically any closing on a Friday at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I get the heebie-jeebies, especially if it's a loan transaction, because you just never know if there's going to be a problem with the loan documents. You don't know if the interest rate, for example, on the promissory note is different than what the client thought it was going to be. And at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, lots of luck trying to get somebody at the bank on the telephone.
Right.
So you run into situations where the buyer has the mover truck there. The seller, is anxious to get out. And we have a form for this, the addendum to sales contract pre-closing occupancy agreement. So we do an extension of the closing till Monday, and then we do that pre-closing occupancy agreement, which I really, really hate to do. I mean, almost always it's a bad thing. And I have just a few examples of some of the things that I've run into over the years. Buyer moves in early. They've agreed to come back Monday and sign their documents, whatever was missing, and they changed their mind. I mean, we could have had something politically happen over the weekend. Stock market could have tanked Friday afternoon. Once they're in there, they're noticing things that the inspector didn't pick up. Had the one buyer actually get arrested and lose his job, so he doesn't qualify for the loan anymore. A pipe bursts over the weekend, and even though the contract says the responsibility for maintaining the property shifts once you occupy the property, the buyer's not happy about it.
Right.
Or the seller dies.
That's right.
And
That's
if
what
the
you're
seller
talking.
dies, it's like, holy cow. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but you want to avoid all those issues. There's very few upsides to having them move in. We have had a few where we've allowed people to move their furniture in the garage.
Right. That's
We'll
what I
limit
usually
specifically
do.
to
Right.
that.
Yep.
So you limit your exposure, and this is what the lawyer does.
That's right.
But moving in early, it almost never works out.
Well, Don, before we go to the next thing, we're going to take a little short
Sure,
break,
Jim.
and we're going to be back in 1 minute here. Thank you.
Thinking of buying or selling a home in Naples, Marco, Bonita, or Estero, Florida? Think of the most experienced York Real Estate Group associated with the #1 brokerage in Naples, Downing Fry Realty, which produced $1.9 billion in sales in 2014, controlling 43% of all transactions in Naples. Jim, Michael, and Morgan York make up the York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty. With over $250 million in sales transactions, they can offer you the expertise and trust you want and need in a realtor. Call them today at 239-273-6727 or visit their website, www.naplesyorkrealestate.com.
Welcome back. Don, we were talking before we go into the next question here.
Sure.
I'd like to tell our viewers, I always try and do my closings on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Right.
So we don't have that problem, maybe on a Friday getting hold of a bank. And, they usually want the money wired. So, we have to make sure they get receipt of the money, and before people give the keys, the
Sure.
seller gives the keys. So that might be just a point that we might bring out to our viewers.
I think that's great, because it also gives you more time to get estimates for certain repair items, And if I may add to that, if you can minimize how many closings you have on the 1st, the 15th, and the 31st,
Right.
those are time
Big
periods
days,
where
right.
big days for the lenders, for the title companies,
That's right.
and you don't want to be caught in a situation where the person's just really, really busy.
That's
You
right.
want your transaction to get all the attention it needs to close properly.
So what's the next thing you got on there?
I call it money in, money out. I mean,
Mhm.
2/3 of our transactions are, mail-aways, as we call it.
Right.
The buyer wires the money in, the seller wants the money wired out. And I had this happen actually with a doctor yesterday, and it was a developer contract. We're doing the closing on this one, and well, actually we're not. But I review these things as a courtesy for clients, and they had the wire instructions as part of the developer contract, and I warned my doctor client that if those wire instructions change, call.
Right.
Yeah, because more likely than not, somebody's been monitoring the emails going on relating to the transaction, and the realtor in this situation had a Gmail address, not to pick on Google, God forbid, but those emails tend to be susceptible to being hacked. So people will sit back and watch what's going on, and then when the deal is ready to close, they'll impersonate the seller or the title company and ask that the monies be wired to this
Right.
particular account, not the one that they had before. And people, like my parents, would just go ahead and do something like that. They wouldn't think twice. They don't see the wire fraud that you and I see at all. I mean,
No.
you and I see it all the time. I mean, it's something we constantly protect against, and I warn all my people, call if the wire instructions change.
People should understand because, we're getting phone calls all the time, emails
Sure.
about scams, so you really have to be careful on the wire fraud because
Oh, absolutely.
they could have,
It's not going
compromised
away.
your computer. Or,
It's never going to go away.
No,
I mean,
well.
it's too easy for people to try. So
Right.
the more you learn, the better off you are.
So the next thing you got on the list here?
Well, I call it, are you an attorney? And I get people who come to closings and or people who draft the language in their own
Right.
contract who are not attorneys. And this is me, again, biting the hand that feeds me, realtors. Here I am, I'm the attorney for the company. I review documents for any realtor ever asks.
Right.
I've never turned anybody down. I say, let me see the handcrafted language you put in the contract. I had one today where the lady wrote down her own escrow agreement information, and she got upset that I suggested the administrative mechanism for how the money will be released. You need the seller and the buyer to sign, or just the buyer, or just the seller, or
Right.
does it do it automatically when I find out that there's not a special assessment? I see these all the time. You don't. But the other reasons for not doing this, other than that it's plain old illegal, you don't have insurance for this. So
Right.
if you draft something and you leave certain aspects open because you're not used to anticipating all the 4,000 things that can go wrong, you don't have insurance for it. I do. Plus, you in 99% of the deals, I'm not saying you do
Right,
this, but 99% of the deals, you're transactional.
That's
You
right.
owe a duty to both sides. I can actually give legal
Right.
opinions. The hard part I see people having is just saying, I don't know, that's not my area of expertise,
Right.
or that's not what I'm licensed for.
That's right.
And I try to, as part of what I do, I train some of the agents and I explain to them that you can take your lack of expertise as a lawyer or as a banker or as an inspector or estimator
Right.
or an appraiser or any of those and make it a joke and say, well, I could sell ice cubes to the Eskimos, but
Right.
I didn't go to law school, or I didn't go and get my construction license,
Right.
or I don't have my mortgage broker's license, but real estate is what I do.
Yeah.
So, limit yourself to what you do. Try to rein in that impulse that you want to fix all your customers' problems. You're only potentially making it worse.
Right.
have your team pitch in at the appropriate moment and answer your customers' questions.
Well, that's why it's important to have a team behind you.
You have to have a team.
That's what we've had, and our people have been with us for a long time. So the next thing, what do you got on your list next here?
Warranting other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had situations where a certain inspection company or a repair company was recommended, and it was owned by the spouse of the realtor. And then when something wasn't discovered, they go and sue the realtor, guaranteeing that this guy does the best work ever, and then he doesn't, and they're not happy with it. They're going to be calling you. It is okay to say I've used this person, 4,000 times in the past, and I haven't had a problem yet. I mean, they're human, but
that's what
so
I'd
far,
say.
The last 4,000 deals have been absolutely fine, but you're free to look around and decide who you want. So try to minimize that, and you'll be a safer person.
Okay, and then what do you got next here? Who's entitled to proceeds?
Oh boy, this happens. Who's entitled to proceeds? My favorite example of that is people who use powers of attorney to execute the seller documents, and this person actually got indicted. This was a number of years ago. When somebody uses a power of attorney to sign on behalf of their mother or father, and then they ask me to make the check payable to the attorney-in-fact, the son, the daughter, whoever it might be, I never do that. Never, ever, ever. Why? Well, the first time somebody asked me that, I don't know why, but it just instinctively, it just didn't feel right.
Right.
So I said, no, I'll make the check payable to mom and dad. They're the sellers on the contract. The person who's the seller in the contract, whether it's a mom and dad or a limited liability company or a corporation or a trust, that's who we make the check payable to.
Right.
And if your power of attorney is that effective, use it at the bank. And in the first case I had, a number of months later, and I know this isn't supposed to happen, but it did, the judge called me. There was an indictment, apparently, of this young man who absconded with mom and dad's money, elder abuse.
Right.
And the judge actually called me. Now, they're not supposed to do that, but the judge knew me and felt comfortable doing so and asked me, who did I make the check payable to? And I said, mom and dad. And why? Well, that's just the way I do it. They're on the contract. And she had a few other questions, and that was it. But ever since then, you make it payable to the entity. You don't want to fall into the old trap of, like with a corporation, gee, Don, we don't have a checking account. Why don't you make it out to me? I'm the president, or I'm the shareholder. There might be 12 other shareholders. There might be a shareholder agreement that limits what happens to the proceeds. You could have the same thing with a limited liability company, a trust.
Right.
Who knows who the beneficiaries are unless you have the trust agreement? Who knows if there are changes to the trust agreement that you are given? You make it payable to the trust. And along those lines, I mean, I get agents who will tell sellers, who needs to show up because it's in trust. And it might be homestead, and you might need a spouse or two. So again, falling into that area of practicing law, you really want to avoid it. I mean, I'm here, or whatever lawyer the client happens to pick, I'm sure, let them make the decision.
Yep. Don, we're going to take a little short break, and we're going to ask who should be attending the closing, too.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Thank you.
Looking for a real estate closing agent in Southwest Florida? Ross Title and Escrow has over 25 years experience and has closed over 20,000 residential real estate transactions. Donald Ross Jr., president of Ross Title and Escrow and a practicing attorney in the state of Florida with a degree in taxation, is here to service your needs. Call Mr. Ross or one of our 4 closing agents for a free consultation today.
Welcome back. Don, who should be attending the closing?
Whoever the closer says so. This is
We
another
can't
one
bring
of those.
everybody, the family, everybody?
You can bring everybody. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I've done closings holding a baby on my lap. I mean, whatever, it's a family occasion, it's a big event in their life, and it's kind of fun in those situations.
Scotch too?
Haven't done it, well, maybe after they left,
Okay.
if it was a hard closing. But I do have a number of situations where the customer was told their spouse doesn't need to attend, the beneficiaries of a trust didn't need to attend, or all the shareholders didn't need to attend, or all the members of the limited liability company didn't need to attend. And they did. They did. The customer should ask the closer or me, somebody at the law firm or title company that's handling the transaction. And sometimes these things change at the last minute.
Right.
The underwriter could come up with a new issue that requires somebody else. It's tough when the client shows up and, gee, my wife has gone back up north. She's on a plane. If you have your team, you learn instinctively, I think, to defer certain questions to me if I'm the one doing it, or whoever you're working with, and realize that what you do is you produce a ready, willing, able buyer or represent the seller, and you do a darn good job at it, but you don't do these other aspects of the transaction.
The one thing, I think we might have touched on this before, but they can't bring a check, so the money all has to be wired in, because you're giving them that notice.
It's on the contract.
Well, somebody, we might explain it. I mean, the deal isn't closing for 45 days, but so we're always constantly reminding them that you need the wiring instructions from the closing agent, and you can't be bringing a check in. I've never had anybody bring cash in, but when I sold my home years ago up in Pennsylvania, somebody brought in $500,000 of cash. So
I've had people ask.
So it's like they didn't tell us they were bringing the cash in that much or whatever.
In
a briefcase, no less.
No, well, with my tax background, I've seen more than my share of cash, and there's certain IRS requirements, there's certain safety requirements. And the time it takes to count, say, $200,000, which I've seen,
it was crazy.
It could be all day, and you have to do it multiple times.
They were upset, the closing agent. This was years and years ago. Now you'd never get away with it today.
Well, I've had those where the cash goes in the freezer, and my wife would lose her mind over it. But people take it personally when you tell them they can't take a check. And what I explained to them is, my trust accounts get audited by my underwriters. I have 2 underwriters at the moment, and every 6 months they audit things. And if I put in a check that has not cleared by closing, I'm putting other people's money at risk. So it's one, I'm going to be looked at. It jeopardizes my license. It jeopardizes other people's money. And no offense, but I've just met you. On this transaction, we might have had a number of phone calls, but we really haven't known them for a long time. It's on the first page of the NABOR contract. The FABAR contract requires collected funds. Foreign checks, forget it, never going to take them, because you don't know when they're going to clear. There have been occasions where you got $1 million deal and it might be $1,000 off. They're on a plane ride. I might take a check in that situation, but I do so knowing that I'm risking my $1,000 if that check bounces. So it's a risk I'm willing to incur. But if $500,000 closing, sorry, I don't know anybody would do it.
And it says here, get the next deal.
That's the art of thanking people. In this day and age, with Dodd-Frank and all the things going on in the world and the fast pace of society and so forth, it seems more and more transactions get to be contentious. You got people from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, buyers trying to be aggressive on getting credits for inspection items, the seller's trying to minimize costs, and they go through a certain amount of friction through the process. For the realtor and for myself, what I always do is when I have them at the table, and they might come in at different times, I thank them. It's sort of a counterintuitive thing. It is a nightmare closing. Nonetheless, it's always a positive tool psychologically, I think, to thank them and, you know, thank you, I know this has been a contentious transaction, and boy, it was a nightmare getting the estimates on that pool, but, you know, thank you for helping and making this possible, and I'm glad you're getting this wonderful home. So they walk out saying, gee, what a nice guy, what a nice person.
Right.
And they're more apt to come back, they're more apt to recommend you to somebody else, that they're not necessarily going to shoot the messenger, you know, for their difficult, contentious transaction. So thanking people, in my mind, is almost the flip side of admitting that you're wrong occasionally, or admitting that you don't know everything. You know, you're not an expert appraiser. It's something people have a hard time doing.
Right.
I mean,
true.
you're so sick of the closing, and the last thing you want to do is thank anybody for anything.
Right.
Or the last thing anybody wants to admit is that they don't know everything, or that they, made a mistake. You know, when you admit to making a mistake, I try to make it minimal, but it sort of diffuses things. It really does. People respect that, and they tend to come back. They have, for me, anyways. If I admitted to an error, and, you know, I'm not divine.
No, everybody makes mistakes.
You know, that's the way I was raised. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I pay for it, and they come back.
Because I tell people, you know, just if somebody's lying or you're not telling the truth now, it gets worse down the road.
Yeah.
You're following? Because ultimately they find out you could have just diffused it right in the beginning if there's a problem. Or
the classic example, I mean, I have 4 children, you have 3, and I've taught this to my children. I had one where it was Pelican Bay, and the capital contribution fee would be waived if the buyer owned another property. And this buyer owned another property, but the realtor didn't tell me, so he had to pay the fee. So he called me all irate, and even though it wasn't my fault, the realtor didn't tell me, I wasn't about to throw the realtor under the bus, because she, in this case, you know, sent me a lot of work. So I just apologized to the man. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I will be over at your condominium in a few moments with a check, and it was $1,500. And I can't tell you how much business I got after that. He was so, I don't know if stun's the right word, but he was certainly surprised that that an attorney would admit any fault at all, you know, and that I would own up to it, and that I would pay for it. And I covered for the agent at the same time, which I try to do whenever I can.
Well, Don, thanks for coming on the show. And
thank you for having me.
Looking forward to 2018 with you.
Merry Christmas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.